born in Minnesota, 1951.
My dad was involved in the struggle for civil rights back in the 1960s. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr., and he heard that famous man give his famous speech, "I have a dream." That speech looked forward to a world and a time where people of all races would enjoy justice and equality. Dr. King did not live to see that come to pass, but his efforts and those of people like my dad did move the goalposts. They changed the world.
And basically fighting for equal rights for black people. In those days, there were still restaurants, if you can believe it, near Washington, D.C. that wouldn't serve black people. It's hard to believe, but that's the case. Of course, in our own country, in Canada, First Nations people didn't get to vote until 1960. Canada was ahead of the United States when it came to abolishing slavery, but it's a long time before Native people got the right to vote.
Today's issues may be a bit different, but the cause of justice goes on. Inspired partly by my dad, I've committed my life to the cause of justice and the protection of innocent human life. Every life is precious and every life is unique. That's why my wife and I have dedicated our lives to the work of the CHP. I was not raised a Christian. I didn't even know what Christian values were. But even as a child, I was always interested in justice. And I think every kid who's ever lived has been concerned about justice. They don't want some other kid to hit them or take their stuff. And adults are just the same. We don't want someone messing with our stuff. We don't want someone messing with our lives. We want the freedom to live our lives and to speak about the things that we believe in. After my wife and I got married, and while we were raising our children, I worked with my hands. I worked on the railroad, I worked on farms in Alberta, and I worked in the sawmills in British Columbia for about 25 years. I know what it's like to get up early in the morning, to go out there in the snow and rain, to get your hands dirty. And honest pay for an honest day's work is a good thing. All Canadians should have the opportunity and the experience of earning their own bread and feeding their family. When I walk around, there's so many things that I can relate to. See this pile of pallets here? There was a time I was building pallets with a guy. See the railroad tracks over there? I worked on the railroad for about 6 years in Alberta, pounding spikes, changing out rail, cutting out broken rails, tightening bolts. I enjoyed that, and I felt like I was a part of Canada's heritage. I felt like I was a part of the history almost of the country, because the railroads were a significant part of Canada's history and culture. I'm happy to have had a little bit of experience on the railroads. It's an important link across the country. I hauled lumber, built houses, worked on farms. There's a greenhouse over there. I worked in the greenhouse before. Done lots of things and enjoyed most of those things. Not all, but work is work, and you do what you have to do to pay the bills. Another thing that was important to me as a child was just enjoying the great outdoors. I loved every kind of bird and animal, and I kept pets. I had snakes and turtles and frogs, even had a screech owl for a while. And I still enjoy watching birds and animals in their natural habitat. It's very important. It's something we need to preserve for our children and for their children. Here I am in somebody's bedroom. Somebody's found a place to sleep under a bridge. It's a shame in our society we gotta sleep out under a bridge. People do what they have to do to survive. Mankind is remarkably resilient that way. Some of these folks will end up being responsible citizens with jobs, and when I was 16, I slept under bridges. I hitchhiked across the country, rode the freights, and I don't regret having that experience. It helped me to grow up. I was 25 years old when I finally made a decision to believe in God. I had had enough of trying to live my life without Him and found it just doesn't work. For the past 40 years, Canada has been trying to live without God. Canada has forgotten that without God's help, we can't accomplish anything of lasting value. Without God's help, we can't even take our next breath. God has richly blessed us in this country. We have an abundance of energy and natural resources, and up until very recently, we have enjoyed great personal freedoms, freedom of religion and freedom of speech. We need to preserve those freedoms for the next generations. For the past couple of years, it's been my great privilege to serve as a leader of the Christian Heritage Party of Canada. As leader, I long to see more Canadians made aware of the biblical foundations of Canada's cultural heritage. And besides the passion to restore respect for Canada's biblical morality, besides our interest in Canada's cultural heritage, my wife and I have a number of personal interests such as history, poetry, music, gardening, and, of course, family. We love watching our grandchildren growing up and developing their own skills and talents. We want them to grow up in a Canada free from political correctness, red tape, and twisted values. And for that reason, my wife and I are willing to sacrifice some of our own personal goals in order to give the next generation the benefits and the freedoms that we enjoyed when we were growing up. I hope you'll join me in dedicating yourself to the restoration of morality, the protection of liberty, and the unleashing of a new era of prosperity. Together, we can do this. Together, and with God's help, we can bring Canada back to her rightful place and stature. Well, that's my story. I'd like to hear your story. I'd like to hear how you plan to help the Christian Heritage Party make Canada a better place to live. Thank you very much.